Come along for the ride.
Hello, my name is Anna Covert, and this is The Solar Coaster, the wild ride through the solar industry told by the people who are living it every day. And today we're diving into a topic that I think is going to surprise people a little bit. Because every time we hear about AI and energy, it's usually framed as a problem. More demand, more strain on the grid, more infrastructure needed. But this article flips that narrative. It argues that generative AI might actually be good for the grid. So naturally, we need to unpack that. But before we do, I want to introduce my co-host. Alex Herrera is the owner of Sun Energy Today, based in Arizona, working directly with homeowners and businesses, navigating energy decisions in real time. Alex, welcome back.
Thanks, Anna.
Have you ever noticed the ultimate irony in how we talk about artificial intelligence today? We treat it like this insatiable monster eating up all our electricity. You read the headlines, and it is all about massive data centers draining local power grids, demanding their own dedicated nuclear reactors just to keep the servers cool while we generate synthetic images or write emails. But there is a massive blind spot in this narrative. What if the very thing we are blaming for breaking the power grid is actually the only thing capable of saving it?
That is exactly the paradox we are living in right now. It is so easy to look at the sheer megawatt footprint of training a large language model and panic, but that is looking at the technology purely as a consumer. What happens when we flip the script and look at generative AI as an orchestrator? We are dealing with an electrical grid that was fundamentally designed over a century ago. It was built for a one-way street, burn coal or split atoms at a central plant, and send the power down the wire to the house. Today, that linear system is collapsing under the weight of its own complexity.
Right? Because the street is no longer one way. We have solar panels on residential roofs, massive wind farms off the coast, and millions of electric vehicles plugged into garages that act as giant, unpredictable batteries. The grid is trying to juggle all these chaotic variables. So, how exactly does generative AI step into this chaos? We know traditional machine learning has been used for basic predictive maintenance for a while, but what makes the generative aspect so revolutionary for energy management?
To understand that, we have to look at the difference between predicting the future and generating solutions for it. Traditional AI looks at historical data and says there is a 90% chance of a demand spike at 6 p.m. tomorrow. That is helpful, but it is passive. Generative AI, on the other hand, acts like a master chess player playing a million games at once. It does not just predict the spike, it generates an entirely new operational blueprint on the fly to handle it. It looks at the weather forecast, the current charge level of every electric vehicle in a 50-mile radius, the wholesale price of natural gas, and the thermal limits of the transmission wires. Then it generates a real-time strategy to balance everything perfectly.
It sounds like the difference between a weather forecaster and a god of weather. The forecaster tells you it is going to rain, but the generative model is actively building the umbrella, rerouting the traffic, and adjusting the drainage systems before the first drop hits the ground.
That is a brilliant way to put it. And the umbrella in this scenario is incredibly complex. Let us take renewable energy as an example. The biggest criticism of solar and wind is that they are intermittent. The wind stops blowing, the sun goes behind a cloud, and suddenly you have a massive drop in power generation. In the old days, a human operator would have to scramble to spin up a natural gas peaker plant, which is expensive and terrible for the environment. Generative AI can simulate millions of micro-weather patterns and generate synthetic data to train grid management systems. It essentially hallucinates every possible disaster scenario, a sudden freeze in Texas, a freak heat wave in London, and figures out the mathematical solution to balance the load before the event ever happens.
The idea of an AI hallucinating disaster scenarios to save us from them is fascinating. Usually, when we talk about AI hallucinations, it is a negative thing, like a chatbot making up a fake legal case. But here, you are saying the ability to imagine things that haven't happened yet is its greatest strength. It is creating virtual stress tests.
Exactly. It builds a digital twin of the entire electrical grid. Imagine a highly detailed, perfect virtual replica of every wire, transformer, and power plant in the country. Generative AI uses this digital twin to play out endless what-if scenarios. What if a hurricane takes out these three major transmission lines while simultaneously everyone in the city turns on their air conditioning? The AI generates thousands of rerouting topologies in seconds. It discovers pathways and efficiencies that human engineers, constrained by traditional rule-based thinking, might never see. It is like AlphaGo discovering that famously creative move against Lee Sedol, but instead of a board game, it is playing with the lifeblood of modern civilization.
That brings up a critical point about the scale of the problem. Human engineers are brilliant, but they are dealing with a system that has grown beyond human comprehension. We are moving towards something called virtual power plants, right? Where millions of individual homes with solar panels and battery walls are networked together to act like one giant power station. I cannot imagine a room full of humans trying to manually negotiate power trades between a million different houses in real time.
It is mathematically impossible for humans to do it. A virtual power plant requires microtransactions of electricity happening in milliseconds. Your house might be drawing power from the grid at 2 p.m., but by 2:15 p.m., a cloud clears, your solar panels overproduce, and suddenly your house is selling power back to the grid. Meanwhile, your neighbor's electric car realizes it has more charge than it needs for tomorrow's commute, so it sells some of its battery power to the local hospital during a price spike. Generative AI is the invisible conductor of this massive, decentralized orchestra. It generates the smart contracts, optimizes the pricing, and ensures the physics of the grid remain stable. It turns chaos into a symphony.
I love the orchestra metaphor, but it also makes me slightly terrified. If generative AI is the conductor and it is managing the microtransactions of millions of homes, what happens when it makes a mistake? We are talking about electricity. It is not a delayed email or a weirdly generated image with six fingers. If the grid goes down, society stops. Hospitals lose power, supply chains freeze, communication networks collapse. Are we really ready to hand over the keys to the kingdom to an algorithm that operates in a black box?
That is the existential question of our time. The black box nature of generative AI is a legitimate, terrifying reality. When an AI generates a complex grid topology that saves millions of dollars and balances the load perfectly, and you ask it, how did you arrive at this conclusion? The answer is essentially a billion mathematical weights and biases that no human can fully parse. It requires an immense leap of faith. However, the industry is not just blindly plugging ChatGPT into the nuclear control room, they are building hybrid systems. The generative AI proposes the solution, but it must pass through deterministic physics-based safety parameters before a single switch is flipped.
So it is essentially an advisory role, but operating at superhuman speed. The AI drafts the master plan, but the laws of physics and hard-coded safety limits act as the final veto. But even with those safeguards, doesn't the system introduce a new kind of vulnerability? If we optimize the grid to the absolute razor's edge of efficiency using AI, do we lose the buffer of redundancy? Sometimes inefficiency is just another word for resilience.
That is an incredibly sharp observation. Hyper-optimization is dangerous. If you tune a guitar string too tightly to get the perfect pitch, it snaps at the slightest temperature change. Grid operators are acutely aware of this. The goal of using generative AI is not actually to run the grid at 100% capacity with zero margin for error. The goal is to intelligently dynamically allocate the redundancy. Instead of keeping a massive, dirty coal plant running on standby just in case, which is our current very expensive form of redundancy, the AI creates virtual redundancy. It knows exactly which non-essential industrial loads can be safely paused for 30 seconds to stabilize the grid without anyone noticing. It finds resilience in flexibility rather than brute force.
It is a shift from physical muscle to digital intelligence. We used to solve energy problems by pouring more concrete and burning more fuel. Now we are solving them with mathematics and code. But let us talk about the physical infrastructure for a moment. I read that generative AI is not just managing the flow of electricity, but it is actually being used to design the physical grid of the future. How does an AI design a better power line or a better battery?
This is where generative AI truly earns its name. In material science, researchers are using generative models to discover entirely new battery chemistries. Instead of spending decades testing different combinations of lithium, cobalt, and nickel in a physical lab, the AI can simulate millions of molecular structures overnight. It generates blueprints for solid-state batteries that could store twice the energy and never catch fire. On the infrastructure side, when a utility company wants to build a new high voltage transmission line across a mountain range, generative AI can analyze the topography, environmental regulations, land ownership data, and historical weather patterns to generate the optimal route. It cuts years of bureaucratic and engineering delays down to weeks.
So the AI that is demanding all this electricity from the grid is simultaneously inventing the next generation batteries and transmission lines to supply it. It is a perfect feedback loop. It reminds me of biological evolution, where an organism alters its environment, and then that new environment forces the organism to evolve further.
The biological analogy is spot on. We are essentially building a nervous system for the planet. Up until now, the electrical grid was just bones and muscle, dumb wires and spinning turbines. Generative AI is the brain and the nerve endings. And just like a biological organism, this system is learning to heal itself. We are seeing the early stages of self-healing grids. If a tree falls on a power line in a rural area, generative AI can instantly detect the fault through sensor data, isolate the broken section, and automatically reroute power through alternative lines to minimize the blackout area. It does this in milliseconds, long before a human dispatcher even picks up the phone.
That level of automation brings up a profound social implication. If the AI is making real time decisions about rerouting power during a crisis, it is inherently making ethical decisions. Imagine a severe winter storm where there simply is not enough power to go around. Rolling blackouts are inevitable. A human operator might make a geographic decision, but an AI, optimizing for the survival of the overall grid, might calculate that shutting down a specific low income neighborhood is mathematically the most efficient way to save the downtown commercial district. How do we ensure these models do not inherit or generate systemic biases when deciding who gets to keep the lights on?
That is the dark side of the equation, and it is something engineers and ethicists are fiercely debating. Algorithms optimize for whatever objective function you give them. If the objective is purely maximize overall grid stability, the math is cold and ruthless. It does not care about socioeconomic status. It cares about load resistance and voltage drops. If a poorer neighborhood happens to be on a structurally weaker node, the AI will cut it off first to save the stronger nodes. To prevent this, we have to encode human values into the mathematical constraints. We have to tell the AI that equity is a metric of success, just like voltage stability. The AI forces us to hold a mirror up to our own society. We can no longer hide behind vague policies. We have to explicitly code our morals into the infrastructure.
That is a staggering thought. We are translating human morality into grid management algorithms. It makes you realize that the transition to renewable energy and smart grids is not just an engineering challenge, it is a philosophical one. We are defining what we value most. And it seems we have no choice but to take this path. The sheer complexity of transitioning away from fossil fuels while simultaneously electrifying everything our cars, our heating, our industry demands a level of intelligence that human brains simply cannot sustain in real time.
Exactly. We have crossed the Rubicon. The energy transition is impossible without artificial intelligence. We cannot run a 21st century decentralized renewable economy on a 19th century mechanical grid. Yes, AI data centers are currently drawing massive amounts of power, and that is a short term strain. But that same AI is unlocking the efficiencies, the new materials, and the orchestration capabilities that will eventually give us an energy system that is abundant, clean, and incredibly resilient. The technology is paying its own electricity bill, so to speak, by redesigning the system from the inside out.
It is a beautiful irony. The very technology that sparked fears of an energy crisis is the architect of our energy salvation. We are watching the grid wake up, becoming aware of every electron flowing through its veins. It leaves you wondering, though, once the grid is fully autonomous, anticipating the weather, managing our homes, and balancing the energy of an entire continent without human intervention, what is the next step for this planetary nervous system? When the machine essentially becomes the environment we live in, how will that change our relationship with power itself?
That is the ultimate question. When energy becomes intelligent, it stops being just a utility. It becomes a silent, invisible partner in everything we do. We will stop thinking about plugging things into the wall and start living inside a continuous, intelligent flow of energy. We are not just upgrading wires, we are redefining what it means to be a technologically advanced civilization. And generative AI is the spark that is making it happen.
A silent, invisible partner managing the heartbeat of the world. It is a future that is equal parts daunting and profoundly inspiring. Thanks for listening to Solar Coaster, the wild ride through the solar industry told by the people who are living it every day. My name is Anna Covert.
And I'm Alex Herrera. See you again next week.
On a solar coaster, come along for the ride.
This episode of the Solar Coaster is narrated using AI-generated technology, representing Anna Covert and Alex Herrera. The material presented is aggregated from publicly available solar industry news sources. All commentary reflects reported industry developments and does not constitute personal opinions, investment advice, or endorsements by the hosts or
Solar
producers.
Coaster is proudly sponsored by Sun Energy Today, redefining what solar means for business and infrastructure. We engineer and deliver large-scale clean energy solutions, from megawatt solar farms to advanced graphene storage, designed for resilience, performance, and measurable return. Sun Energy Today, built to power what's next. Learn more at sunenergytoday.com.